What if the schools we send our children to aren't designed to set them free, but to quietly enslave them? This was the explosive argument of one of history's most fascinating and dangerous women, Emma Goldman. And her ideas about education are, somehow, more relevant today than they've ever been. For over 30 years in the early 20th century, Red Emma was a defining voice of radicalism in America. She was an anarchist, a feminist, a writer, and a speaker who challenged the very foundations of society: the state, capitalism, religion, and patriarchy. But woven through all her work was a profound and often overlooked argument about education. To Goldman, the classroom wasn't a neutral space. It was a battlefield for the mind. She saw conventional schooling as a weapon used by the state to mold obedient citizens and compliant workers up. System designed not to liberate, but to control. So, let's break down Emma Goldman's groundbreaking critique. We'll explore her argument that traditional schooling is a tool of oppression, and then uncover her vision for a completely different kind of education. This was an education rooted in anarchist principles, one she believed was the master key to unlocking both individual and societal freedom. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a vital conversation about the real purpose of education itself. To understand Emma Goldman's vision for a new kind of school, we first have to see what she was fighting against. When she looked at the American public school system, she didn't see a place of enlightenment. She saw something far more sinister. She saw a factory. In her essay, The Social Importance of the Modern School, Goldman laid out her case with blistering clarity. The main purpose of state-run education, she argued, wasn't to foster creativity or critical thought. Its purpose was to produce a standardized product, the loyal citizen and the docile worker. It was a system of compulsory mental feeding designed to drill and pound a human mass into absolute uniformity. Think about the structure of a traditional school. The ringing bells that dictate when you move, the rigid rows of desks, the standardized curriculum handed down from above, the constant focus on discipline, obedience, and respect for authority. To Goldman, these weren't just random features. They were the gears of an indoctrination machine. She argued the real harm wasn't just that schools taught things not worth knowing, but that they pretended to be true education, which enslaved the mind more effectively than any dictator could. From a young age, children are taught to sit still, listen passively, and accept the teacher's word as final. Their natural curiosity and desire to explore are systematically dulled. The system, she claimed, stunted the child, dulled its mind, and warped its very being. The goal was to create people who would follow orders without question. Whether from a foreman on a factory floor or a general on a battlefield, the school was the first and most important cog in the machine of the state and its capitalist economy. It taught patriotism as a virtue, preparing young people to sacrifice themselves for a nation-state that, in her view, existed to protect the interests of the rich. It instilled a work ethic that valued obedience over initiative, making them perfect cogs for an industrial system that ran on exploited labor. Goldman saw this as a profound betrayal. She believed every child was born with a unique spirit and a desire for knowledge. The traditional school's job was to crush that spirit. As she put it, there is no more harmony between compulsion and education than there is between tyranny and liberty. For Goldman, real education couldn't be imposed. It had to be discovered. And the public school, with its focus on conformity and control, was the single greatest obstacle to that discovery. It wasn't a place of learning. It was a place of taming. A place where the wild, free-thinking potential of the individual was broken, domesticated, and prepared for a life of service to systems of power it was never taught to question. So if that was the disease, what was Goldman's cure? Her alternative wasn't just a minor reform or a new curriculum. It was a revolutionary reimagining of what a school could be. Her vision was deeply inspired by the Spanish anarchist educator Francisco Ferrer, who founded the Escuela Moderna, or Modern School, in Barcelona in 1901. Ferrer's project was a direct challenge to a Spanish educational system dominated by the Catholic Church, which relied on dogma and rote memorization. His school aimed to provide a rational, secular, and non-coercive education. When Ferrer was unjustly executed by the Spanish state in 1909 after being accused of orchestrating a rebellion, he became a martyr for free education. Goldman, along with other radicals, championed his cause and helped inspire a modern school movement that spread across the globe, including to the United States. These schools became the living embodiment of her educational philosophy. So, what did anarchist education actually look like? The core principles were autonomy, cooperation, and critical thinking. The foundation was self-directed learning. Unlike the rigid one-size-fits-all curriculum of the state, the modern school centered the child's own interests. There were no compulsory lessons or strict timetables. The goal was to draw out the child's natural abilities, not to pour in pre-approved information. If a child was fascinated by botany, they spent their time in the garden. If they were captivated by mechanics, they were given tools to build and deconstruct. The teacher's role wasn't to be a drill sergeant of facts, but a guide who could protect the child against the teacher's own ideas and awaken the child's own energies. Next, the model was built on cooperation and democracy. The hierarchy of the traditional classroom teacher as absolute authority, students as passive subjects, was abolished. In its place was a community of equals. Students were involved in the school's decision-making, learning to negotiate and solve problems together. This was education as mutual aid, not social control. The schools rejected rewards and punishments, which Ferrer and Goldman believed only taught kids how to cheat and conform. Instead, they aimed to cultivate an internal sense of responsibility born from real empathy, not fear. Finally, and perhaps most crucially, was the unwavering commitment to critical thinking. Anarchist education wasn't value neutral. It was explicitly anti-authoritarian. The curriculum didn't shy away from big questions. Textbooks took stances against capitalism, the state, and the military. Students were taught to question everything, especially power. This wasn't about replacing one dogma with another. It was about giving children the intellectual tools to understand and critique the systems of oppression that governed their lives and to imagine radical alternatives. Learning happened through field trips, hands-on projects, and real-world engagement. The arts were central, seen as a vital way to foster individual expression. The goal, as Goldman put it, was to develop an individual who understands themselves and their connection to others, finding their place in society not through force, but through free association. This wasn't just a school, it was a microcosm of the anarchist society Goldman imagined. It was a space designed to prove that a different way of living and learning was possible. It aimed to produce not obedient citizens, but free-spirited individuals capable of independent thought, voluntary cooperation, and a lifelong rebellion against all forms of domination. But for Goldman, this fight wasn't just about the classroom. Her critique of schooling was part of her total critique of modern society. She defined anarchism as a philosophy of liberation, freeing the human mind from religion, freeing the human body from the coercion of property, and freeing everyone from the shackles of government. Education was the key to that first and most fundamental liberation, freeing the mind. Goldman believed anarchism wasn't some far-off utopia. It had to be lived, here and now. Her worldview was a comprehensive assault on all forms of hierarchical power. She saw the state, capitalism, religion, and patriarchy as four pillars of a single, interlocking system of oppression, and her educational ideas were designed to tear them all down. Take the state. Goldman saw it as an inherently violent institution designed to protect the property of the ruling class. Public schools were its propaganda arm, teaching a blind patriotism that prepared citizens to kill and be killed for the state's interests. Anarchist education countered this by teaching children that humanity transcends national borders and that war is a crime against it. By teaching them to question authority, it was creating citizens who would be ungovernable. Then there was capitalism. Goldman saw it as a system that exploited workers and crushed their creative potential for profit. Traditional schools, she argued, were just a training ground for this system. They prepared children for a life of drudgery by teaching them to value competition over cooperation. Radical education fought this by refusing to grade or rank students, promoting cooperative learning, and valuing a child's creative passions above any preparation for the job market. It aimed to create people who would demand more from life than just a wage. Goldman was also a revolutionary feminist, decades ahead of her time. She argued that women's liberation required total sexual and reproductive freedom. She linked the oppression of women directly to institutions like traditional marriage, which she saw as a form of bondage, and the church. The education she advocated for was radically coeducational. She argued that teaching boys and girls together with truth and simplicity about their bodies would foster a beautiful comradeship and dismantle the toxic culture that oppressed women. For Emma Goldman, all these struggles were connected. You couldn't fight for economic freedom without fighting for women's freedom. You couldn't fight the state without fighting the church. And you couldn't achieve any of it without a new form of education. Education was the foundation. By cultivating free-thinking and cooperative individuals, anarchist schools were planting the seeds of a new world inside the shell of the old. They weren't just teaching subjects. They were teaching freedom itself. It's been over a century since Emma Goldman first made these arguments, yet they sound eerily familiar in the hallways of modern schools. The machinery has changed. The factory floor is now an open-plan office, but the fundamental questions Goldman raised are still staring us in the face. Consider the obsession with standardized testing. All over the world, learning is increasingly geared towards teaching to the test. Kids spend countless hours drilling for multiple-choice exams that measure a very narrow set of skills. What would Goldman say? She'd likely see it as the ultimate expression of the uniformity she despised. It's a system that prizes memorization over critical inquiry and conformity over creativity. It turns teachers into technicians and students into data points. This system doesn't ask if a child is curious, passionate, or has a strong sense of justice. It only asks if they can fill in the correct bubble. Think about the endless debates over school curriculum, the battles over how to teach history, which books to allow in libraries. These are a modern version of the struggle Goldman identified. Attempts to ban discussions of systemic inequality or sanitize history are a direct continuation of the effort to use schools for social control. Goldman believed that the most violent element in society is ignorance, and that the state maintains its power by creating a mass of people who have never been taught to question. Goldman's ideas also challenge us to look at the very structure of the school day. The rigid scheduling, the division of knowledge into separate subjects, the top-down relationship between teacher and student, these are all legacies of an industrial model. But in a world that supposedly demands creativity and collaboration, is this model still working? The principles of anarchist education's self-directed learning, cooperative problem-solving are increasingly seen as crucial components of a 21st-century education. Movements for project-based learning and more democratic schools all share a common ancestor with the modern school movement Goldman championed. Even the mental health crisis among young people can be seen through a Goldman-esque lens. The intense pressure to perform, the competition for grades, the alienation inside large institutions, all of it can be profoundly damaging. Goldman's emphasis on developing the whole person, not just the academic mind, feels like a necessary antidote. We may not be ready to abolish the state, but we don't have to in order to see the value in her critique. Emma Goldman forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Are our schools fostering real intellectual curiosity, or are they just teaching compliance? Are we preparing our children for a life of freedom or a life of quiet subordination? Her ideas are a vital reminder that education shouldn't be about creating cogs for a machine, but about liberating the human spirit. Emma Goldman was a revolutionary. She fought for a world free from coercion and exploitation, and she knew that such a world could never be built without a revolution in how we raise and educate our children. Her critique was total. She saw traditional schooling as a tool of the state, a factory for producing obedient workers and patriotic citizens. It was a system designed to dull the mind and suppress creativity. In its place, she envisioned an education for freedom, inspired by the Escuela Moderna. This was an education built on self-directed learning, cooperation, and the relentless practice of critical thought. It was an education designed not to serve the powerful, but to empower the individual. Her philosophy reminds us that education is never a neutral act. Every choice we make about our schools, from the curriculum we teach to the tests we administer, is a political choice. It's a choice with profound implications for the kind of society we're creating. It is a choice between conformity and creativity, between obedience and autonomy, between domination and freedom. Goldman's ideas aren't a simple blueprint to be copied, but a challenge to be confronted. They force us to ask a fundamental question. What is the ultimate purpose of sending a child to school? Is it to train them for a job and ensure they fit neatly into the existing social order? Or is it to help them become free, critical, and fully realized human beings capable of imagining and building a better, more just world? If you found this exploration of radical ideas compelling, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into political philosophy and history. Thank you for watching.